Welcome to Processing Prosperity, a time that we're taking outside of our prayer watches and devotional to help explain prosperity and all the revelations being released during the Prosperity Watch. I'm joined here by some great leaders here at Glory of Zion, Ann Tate, Tobias Lyons, and John Dixon. So we can just go ahead and get started. One of the things I really want to talk about was what does it mean to truly prosper? Because I think a lot of times when you think about the word prosperity, your mind instantly or outside in the whole world goes to money, right? It's like, okay, how can I get more money? I'm prospering in my bank account, financially, all of that. But what I feel like has kind of been discussed during our prayer gatherings are that there's so many different definitions for it. So how would you really describe what it means to truly prosper?
I think about that in relationship to shalom. Shalom means peace of mind, peace of soul. It means peace of your relationship with the Lord, peace in your relationship with others. It's a pervading peace in your whole life. Prosperity is the same way. It should be a pervading presence or force in your whole life that causes your relationships with your neighbors, relationships with your friends, relationships with strangers, relationships with work, with the kind of work you do. It's prosperity in every single area, expecting that you're going to have a good experience and that you're going to triumph in all of it.
Wow.
Yeah, I think that's good, and I think that's one of the biggest thrusts in these 21 days is to see that, like you said, in culture and society, a lot of times when we think of prosperity, we think of our bank accounts and we think financially. And I think what the Lord's doing is he's saying, yes, that is a great portion and a needed portion and a kingdom portion that we should all be functioning in, the multiplication of the finances that we have to steward. But so many times I think when we think of financially, it turns it to like a personal thing. Mm-hmm. And I think of the thrust for this 21 days is saying, take it outside of what you're used to, which may be your finances, and say, okay, there are these different aspects of my life. So like the revelation that I'm getting, how is that prospering? Or my family, how are my kids prospering? Mm-hmm. Or on my job, how is the work that I'm doing prospering? And it's taking it necessarily out of a personal aspect and saying, okay, well, if I'm stewarding all of these portions correctly and all of these portions that are in my field are prospering, then in some way that's going to affect somebody else prospering. Mm-hmm. And so it takes it from a personal kind of mindset and perspective to a more corporate perspective to say, this isn't just about how I'm prospering. Yes, the Lord wants that, but ultimately it's a kingdom prospering, which takes the focus to the entire body. Mm-hmm. So it takes it off of yourself and into saying, if I'm doing my portion, then that means somebody else's portion is being unlocked for them. Wow. And that in itself is prosperity. It's the multiplication, the aspect of multiplication.
So that's really cool because I never thought about it in that way. And that even reminds me of when Chuck spoke, I think it was probably during starting the year off right, and he said if we're going to be kingdom, we have to act kingdom, I believe, or I might be saying that wrong, but that kind of reminds me of that. It's like if God gives us grace freely, that's what we should give to other people. So even how you're saying prospering in those other areas, if that's what God gives to us as a blessing or a gift, we should be giving that out freely as well. If I have that correctly, I don't know.
You can have a lot of money mm-hmm. and not be happy and not be fulfilled and not be full. Mm-hmm. And people think, well, if I just had a lot of money, then all my problems would be gone. That's not how it works. Mm-hmm. There's a prosperity in your whole life. There's a prosperity in your family, those that are around you. What have you brought forth, mm-hmm. or what are you accomplishing? You have to look at a whole picture to be prosperous. So the Bible talks about prosper as your soul mm-hmm. prospers.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Well, and then, so with that, because we also talked about giving God space. So kind of what exactly would you say that means when you give God space? And then how does it relate to prospering?
It's giving God a chance to come in. Our mindsets block him off even when we ask for something in prayer. Yet we think that's never going to happen. And I tell people a lot of times, I said, you're going to have to pray, and then you need to leave the door open just a little bitty crack. If you leave that door open just a little bitty crack, it'll give God a chance to come in and do something in your life. When David had sinned with Bathsheba, and the pronouncement was that your child by Bathsheba shall die, David went into the tabernacle and began to pray before the Lord. And they said, David, there's no chance. There's God has said it. That's what's going to happen. And you're in there praying that it doesn't. And then when they brought him the news that the child had died, he got up, washed his face, and they said, well, we thought you were going to kill yourself or something. He says, no, I just wanted to give God that little space. He didn't say that, but that's what he was doing. He said, I know God said he was going to do that, but who knows? Mm-hmm. He might change his mind. I know God. He might turn everything around, give me that child and give me everything else. But that was not what was going to happen. But he had a continual door cracked open for God. Mm-hmm. No matter how dark, no matter even if God said this is not going to happen, he still cracked that door open a little bit just in case God was going to come through.
Yeah. That's a really great point, because like you said, sometimes our minds can create those barriers, like they're saying, breaking down those barriers and allowing God to come in and like move freely in what he's like calling to do, and for us to like allow for him to do that. What are your takes on it, as far as giving God space?
Well, I've been thinking a lot about the borders because we have such border issues right now. And it says, the watchman lieth awake in vain if the Lord does not guard the city. And so this morning when I was in my time with the Lord, I was thinking that him guarding our borders is part of prosperity. And it also is a portion that comes I thought, well, Lord, how do I activate you in these borders? Mm-hmm. And he said, if you align yourself with my goodness, if you align yourself with my mercy, if you align yourself with me, then I am automatically released to guard your borders, because you don't go outside your boundaries, and your borders are established in the first place by me. Mm-hmm. And you're not expecting more or less. And I don't know if I've ever thought about that before in relationship to my borders and boundaries, or the borders and boundaries of the United States, or other sovereign nations. And I think that right now I'm going to be spending some time working with that, because it is such an assault on our nation, that there's some things in there that we need to recognize as a righteous position to take with the Lord. This whole season is about shifting into position.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. It's an interesting take on it too, especially the way that you connected it with both with yourself and then nationally too. I think is really interesting.
I think I asked the Lord after the order got reestablished after that first watch on Wednesday. I said, okay, what does that look like personally? What does that look like corporately, like to give you space? Because when that came forth on Wednesday during the watch, all I could say was like, Lord, you'll have to show us like what that looks like, because at that moment I was like, I really have no comprehension of in this season what that looks like. What does that mean to give you space? You know, what does that look like? And as I was meditating on it that night, it was like how he kind of showed me was, he said, you know, we're talking about the seed, we're talking about harvesting, we're talking about plowing and planting. And it's like when a farmer goes and sows seed, there are steps that you have to take in order to see that seed grow, right? But also wisdom would say you're not just waiting for this portion to raise up, because if all you're focused on is this portion, then when that portion's gone, there's nothing left. And the Lord was like, there has to be storehouses that are there for the harvest. You have to have a place for the harvest to go, or else it's going to get spoiled or stolen. You know, and he said, and think about it this way, think about when the farmer is waiting and cultivating those seed, his mind is also on the storehouse for that seed. And he's saying, so the farmer isn't wasting time by waiting on the seed, but he's allowing me the space to work with that seed, while at the same time looking into the future and then giving me space to grow as the harvest grows. And so that's kind of the perspective that I've been trying to sit on and let him expand in me, is that, okay, we're in this time of plowing and we're in this time of seed time and harvest, but I can't keep my focus on the growth of the seed and the cultivation of the seed specifically. I have to have an expanded vision, and in that expanded vision of the seed, but also of the storehouse, it's like then there's room for the Lord to say, now that you're seeing farther and now that you're seeing beyond what is just in front of you, I have access to move. I have some space to move, not just in the present, but I also have space to move in how the future looks and how I lead you in the future.
Okay. So with that, what exactly is the seed? Like, is that people, or is it, I know it may like symbolism for something, but I'm just curious as to what that exactly refers to, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Okay.
I mean, for me, I think the seed can be metaphorically, or it can be relative, or it can be anything to the portion that you're carrying, or the portion that you feel like you've planted. If you want to break it down, then saying like missionaries are sowing the seed, like their purpose, they have been sent, right? Like to nations and to countries. They are sowing, they are putting the spirit that's inside of them and the truth and releasing it into nations and into countries. So if you think about it from that sense, they are sowing the seed, the spirit that's inside of them. They are giving their portion of that into that country.
Okay.
And for me, when you think about seed, I think a lot of times, like if we're putting in a reference maybe to like the watches, so like anytime I get up and I declare something, or I am praying in corporate, what I'm doing is I am seeding the atmosphere with declaration, and you're seeding the atmosphere with decrees and with the words, with revelation that is inside of you. And so if you ask like, what is the seed is ultimately just the portion that you know has a greater portion. It's something that the Spirit has given you revelation of that is not fully manifested, but in declaring it and in releasing it, then you're giving it good ground, you're giving it soil, you're giving it a place to manifest and to grow. you
Okay.
know?
Awesome. Thank you. Because I've always been kind of like curious about it, because I know like, of course, like planting seeds into your soul and everything like that. But even when you were saying it, what I instantly took of that is, if we're looking in the context of like people and growing in their faith, like for me, I'm still growing and knowing like the word better, having a better relationship with God, where I feel like I have a direct connection with him. But even still, like there are people around me who have way more wisdom than I do that I'm learning from. So when you said that, that's kind of like instantly what I thought about, is like how even people in my generation, we're growing in our own faith and how we walk and move and have that relationship with God. But even still, there's a generation that came before us that are still moving and doing their thing and kind of teaching us too. So that's why I just asked, like, you know, in reference of the seed.
I think as people, we're all seeds. You know, I mean, we were spoken, we were birthed out of the ground, which was a seed from the word, the mouth of the Lord. He spoke it, and it created a being, you know. And if we go back to the hovering, like in this time where the Spirit is hovering over the seed, it's this idea that says there is something that's sitting in the core of us as people. And if we allow the Spirit space to have room to hover and to move over that portion of the seed, over whether it's a promise. You know, we speak a lot about the promises, and we function in relation to how we see that promise. So if our promise is limited to the now, then the full manifestation of those promises are only going to manifest to the portion that we see right now, you know? And so if we move forward in the faith and with allowing the Spirit space to hover, then it allows that seed a place to cultivate and to grow. And for us, all that is saying any portion of us that is not fully manifested in Him or in the Spirit and from the Spirit, take that away. Let the Spirit replace it so the soil is good, and then let's move out of faith in that new portion so it can continue to grow.
That's really
It's
cool.
everything you say is a seed. It's either a seed for good or a seed for bad. And as the Lord hovers over you every day in your prayer time, as you spend time with the Lord day by day, whether you're building or you're a mature Christian, this is the same grocery store we all go to every morning to receive the word which is in our mouth. And I know people around here know that I will come and say, the Lord spoke this to me to say, and I want you to hear me when I say it. It's like the Lord is speaking this revelation, this revelatory word, this seed that I'm carrying, and He'll tell me who to go to. And it's in my life, in people that call me on the phone. It's all through our life. We are carriers of this word, of this seed that the Lord quickens you with. And it's that hovering presence that causes that to be birthed exactly like Jesus was birthed from Mary. The Lord spoke a word into Mary, and then He hovered, and then He spoke. He came forth until the vision was full and rich, and then He had the word of God in His mouth. And that is how we move.
That's awesome.
So seed is anything that's a potential.
Yes.
It's a potential. This is energy. It's called kinetic energy because right now it's just a potential. But if I let it go, it produces a force and hits the ground. So that's why when God gives us a seed, as long as we just hang on to it, you know, as I'm going to keep it here, then it's not doing anything.
That's right.
And there's no potential in it. But when we pray for it, when we let the Spirit of God hover over it, when we set it out and say, God, I'm going to believe this is going to produce some energy, it's going to produce some force. I'm saying it, and I'm putting it out there. So a seed can be a person that has the potential. God puts a seed in them. There's a gifting or something that has the potential if you give God space to come forth. It can be a promise. You know, a promise is just kinetic until you begin to speak into it, you begin to pray for it, you begin to release it, you begin to give God space for it, and then it can become actual energy.
Well, thank you guys so much for explaining that, because I think it definitely opens my perspective up a lot more about it and understanding it better. But even kind of brings you to the question of, with like how you say like releasing the seed, and we also talked about like the boundaries, or even released during today's prayer watch was getting over your mind, like getting outside of your mind to allow for Him to do it. What would you recommend, or how do we let God transform our minds so that He can have that free will to do that, if that makes sense?
The most important prayer I ever prayed was I said, Lord, give me your perspective. And I'd been a Christian for a number of years before I ever prayed that. And I had my own perspective up until then, or the perspective of my mind, are the perspective of my culture. And on that day, I began to entertain, how does the Lord see this? And what is His perspective on whatever I was working with? And whoever I'm working with, I try to hold, if I can determine what God's perspective is. And a lot of times I'll be quiet until I hear that, because otherwise I'll express my mind, my culture, all these other things that are peripheral, that really don't carry any weight.
Wow.
Yeah, I think like that perspective is so huge, and I think ultimately perspective boils down to it's just a choice. You can choose whether you see it your own way or whether you see it God's way. And most of the time we try to justify that decision by finding some gray area, by like manipulating the choice in some way, thinking, well, the Lord said this, but I could do it this way. Well, that's, all you're doing is just choosing your own way because it's manipulation. But I think when we think about it from that perspective of it's just a simple choice, and it's the choice of which perspective you're going to go with. And ultimately that choice is just saying, okay, I know, however great or small, what the Lord's telling me to do is. If I make the choice to follow it in faith, then that's all that matters. And in that, it changes a thought process, because I know that personally, and I know for everybody in this room, that there is testimony after testimony after testimony of saying, I chose to trust God with this, regardless of what it looked like, and He showed up time
That's right.
and time and time and time again. And that's how your mind changes, because that supernatural ability of the Lord to come in and do whatever He wants, to make a way where there is no way, that defies our human logic. And your spirit can't help but then overcome your mind in that sense, because you've tasted the goodness, you've seen His power, you've experienced it. So it's not then just a thought, but it's an actual reality. And moving in those portions of faith then just create greater portions of faith in you, because you say, okay, well, I did this and the Lord showed up. So now the next time He asks me, I know that I can do it, because if I didn't, then I'd just be going back to an old portion. I'd be settling for what was already there, and He showed up that one time. So why would He not do it again? And I think that is a good way of saying that's how your mind changes, is by giving God a chance to prove Himself. If we don't ever give Him a chance, He's got nothing to work with. So moving step by step by step. And I think it goes back to during the conference when they were talking about, we talked to the mountain and we asked that mountain to move, but a lot of times we expect it just to all of a sudden disappear instead of saying, okay, how am I going to walk the fullness of that mountain moving out? How am I going to say, okay, this is the first step. Oh, that mountain moved a little bit. Now let me take the next step, And so the persistence of taking those small steps of faith, it then changes the perspective of your mind, because God shows up and proves Himself.
Yeah.
Israel, many times when they were in a tight and somebody's coming to wipe them off the face of the earth, what they would do is they would gather and they would begin to bring back up to God all the times that He had saved them. And they'd just start off, Lord, You brought us through the Red Sea. You brought us in the Promised Land. You helped us to defeat these people. You helped us to defeat those people there. And they would go and begin to recite all those things. And what that does is what Tobias was saying. All of a sudden your mind was like, we're going to get wiped out. But then slowly it's like, okay, all right. God did that. Yeah, that's right. I remember that. Okay. And so if we do that, it changes our mindset. And Violet and I do that a lot, because we get in situations and it's like, oh my gosh, okay. And we just go and say, okay, God, You did this, and You did that for us, and You did this over here, and You're going to do this here. And so our mindset goes from over here, which mindsets are the hardest thing to change. It went from over here, and all of a sudden it comes up, and it's like, oh, no problem. I've got faith now. I know you're going to do this, God. I know you're going to do it because you did all these other things. So you have to rehearse these things in your prayers when you come before God, just like Israel did.
Well, and actually, God remembers all of that. We don't. And
That's
so
right.
when you're
We're reminding
rehearsing
ourselves
those,
before
we're
the
reminding
Lord.
ourselves,
Yeah.
and your faith muscle is like doing calisthenics.
Yeah.
Your faith muscle begins to expand,
Yeah.
and you begin to think, I can take this new territory because he's giving me. I'm reminding him, I'm hearing, I'm remembering. It's coming out of my mouth, and it's instructing my spirit. He's never left you or forsaken you. He's never left you on the side of the road. He's never not done what you ask him to do. He's never lost a fight yet. He is always victorious. He always causes us to triumph. I rehearse those daily because of the fights we find ourselves in.
And the opposite of that is just as true. You're faced with a challenge, and you just look at it, and you meditate on it, and you mull it over, and you get more depressed and more depressed and more depressed, and you have no faith to come up against it. And many people do that, and they're defeated again, and they're defeated again, and they're defeated again. And then they rehearse those defeats instead of saying, no, let's stop this process. Let's go back and begin to renew our mind and bring those things, rehearse the victories of the Lord.
That's a really great perspective too, because like you said, I never even thought about the opposite of that and how that becomes its own pattern too.
It is. It's powerful.
That's really good. So I guess my last question would be really any advice that you have, because I feel like a lot of times we'll come into prayer and it's an amazing worship, we receive amazing words, but sometimes you walk out of the doors and you're like, what do I do now? What's next? I've got this amazing word in my hand, but then I experience something and it's like, man, I'm back to that struggle, right? So what would you say is like your advice?
Well, I think
when it
that's
comes
why
to that?
this format that we're in for this 21 days is so important, because as long as I've been here, this format hasn't existed in one of our extended focuses.
That's right.
And so the fact of saying, okay, press in for 3 days consecutively and pull down revelation and manifest this revelation and then sit on it for 4 days, meditate on it, chew it, just let it soak into your spirit. And then that goes back to giving the Lord space, because in those 4 days of processing it, you'll be amazed at what happens if you're faithful to steward that portion, because that's a principle of stewarding, because it's been set out. I mean, the prophet said it, do it for 3 days and then sit on it. So if you obey the word of the prophet, the word says that you're going to prosper, and so I think saying, I'm going to choose for 4 days after I have entered in to sit back on it and meditate on it and look over how that applies not only to my life, but to the sphere that I'm part of and to the greater corporate sphere, then you'll be amazed when you come back in on those next 3 days what he's done and how he's unlocked and how he's prospered that portion that you took to him in.
Well, like you did, you wrote down questions. And so you're interacting with the Lord the whole time you're asking those questions.
Oh, wow.
And so, and I would say don't come into prayer cold. It should be part of your relationship with the Lord. You've got to have a relationship with him to begin with, or begin to develop a relationship with him. For some people, this may be the first time they've ever spent 21 days doing anything engaged with the Lord.
Yeah.
And if it is, I tell you, please continue, because he is faithful. You cannot seek him in vain. And if you come in every morning and you just read what has been said, that does not mean that's how the prayer will go. It just means that's our ground zero for working today. And then afterward, in the 4 days, go back, reread, ask the Lord the questions that you have before you, and discuss it with other people that can help build your faith, people that you know may know something you don't know. And Janice and I spent years, there was no one else to process with. And for years, we spent years processing with each other. And sometimes we'd get mad, sometimes we'd argue, but it was iron sharpening iron. So don't be afraid to process with the Lord and with the people around you. It's what build relationship.
That's really great.
Like Tobias said, you've got to take it home. You have a chance to mull it over for a few days. And Violet and I have always done this weekly. I don't see how people get by who don't, because
either.
It's the truth.
because the promises God gives you on Sunday or Wednesday, there's going to be something that comes up. And if you've kind of processed those things a little bit, then all of a sudden this thing comes up and you say, oh, well, I've got a rock in my hand already, and I'm going to throw it at that thing. But Violet and I, 100 good things might be said in a service, but you're trying to grab the things that God's speaking to you. It's like dot, 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 boom. Oh, wait, I'll write it down on my phone, and Violet takes a note, and dot, 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 boom, and there's another thing. So out of the 100, we have 5 things, or 3, or 1. But we take those things home and we rehearse those. We begin to bring those before God, and usually we have a situation that we've got to use that's we've got 1 to 5 stones in our hand, and so we use it and we use it and we use it, and we use the promises to war with. What Paul told Timothy, he says, take these promises and war with them, fight with them. And so you got to get up and fight with those promises. And so the promises are coming to you. Listen, to let God speak to your heart more than just the words that are coming forth. See what God is dropping as a seed down into you, and don't forget that seed. Water it when you get home. And find people that you can pray about it and apply it to the situations that are coming against you, unless you never have anything come against you. And it's useless anyway. But I think most people do have a few things that come against them, and so you've got something to fight with.
Well, thank you guys so much. Thank you for your great advice, for helping break this down with me and for anyone watching. So yeah, thank you again. I really appreciate you being here.
Sure.
And thank you guys for watching. If this is your first time watching GZI TV and The Table, there's tons of other great episodes. And then you can also follow us on Facebook at Glory of Zion International to keep up with our 21 days to break into a new level of prosperity.